Hi, and welcome to the Views and Values SAC overview for Year 12 Literature 2015. I'm trying to give you here in this brief presentation an overview of the SAC task assessment criteria and how you might approach it. And these refer both to Kath Walker and Adrian Rich. So let's take you through some of the key things to keep in mind. Just keeping a big picture on the task you're being asked to do. This is a passage analysis, so you'll be given some poems to look at, 3 poems, just like the exam. So you use the poems as a basis for discussion, and I think that's probably worth emphasising too. Not the whole discussion, but a basis for discussion. So you need to bring in other poems to your SAC and be prepared to do that. You can bring in the book or some printed versions of Kath Walker's poems, lightly annotated. Really important, as in playing darts, that you hit the targets. And so I want to talk about the targets in terms of assessment and how you hit them. Period 4 Friday. So the first criteria, and a pretty important one, these are all worth the same amount of marks, is context. And the context might be summarised as the circumstances that form the setting for the event. In other words, for us, it's kind of thinking about when and where the writing is going on. So obviously for Kath Walker, it's in the 40s, 50s and 60s in Australia. Adrian Rich, slightly different context in terms of politics in both those examples, but really important that you talk that through. This Views and Values is about what an author has to say about a particular society at a particular time in the world. Analysis of views and values, obviously really critical. A comprehensive analysis is what you're aiming for of the ways in which views and values are suggested by what the text endorses, challenges, or leaves unquestioned. Now, leaves unquestioned, I'm not too fussed about that. I think if we're doing Shakespeare, we might talk a bit about some of the things that he does leave unquestioned because of the context he's living and writing in. But if you look at these key things on the right-hand side, what viewpoints, particularly about society, are being shown here? What values emerge from the writer? What do these poems endorse or support? And what do these poems challenge or criticise or condemn? And really try to be specific. And obviously for poetry, that means lots of quotes. That's criteria 2. And a really important one in terms of getting this SAC right. Criteria 3 talks about is a similar one, but it's a bit more about the way in which the text critiques society. And if you think about critiques as kind of forming a criticism of, it's what actually is it that Rich or Walker are saying about the society that they are criticising, condemning, showing, highlighting, illustrating, starkly showing for us. Not too worried about the second part. You notice it's an and/or thing there. So for our purposes of our SAC, it's really the first half of that I'm wanting you to focus on. And are there things that the poet suggests we should do? Is it simply criticisms and critiques, or are there things, and I think there are, for a hint, I think there are in both those poets, are there things that they suggest we should do, artists should do, etc.? So criteria 4 is about textual detail, and this is a criteria that comes up again and again and again in literature because it's about being close to the text, isn't it? And I think, we all are aware of that. But just being, for those of you who were in the writing session over the holidays, bundling evidence up, bringing in, using weaving quotes together, really good skills. So you can bring in multiple poems as examples of the kind of points you're making. And then finally, expression, being expressive, coherent, fluent, and developing your ideas in a way that sounds good. The power of the well-placed adjective. sentences that make sense, sentences that have one thought, sentences that vary in length, paragraphs that are clear with a topic sentence and evidence, and then move on to another paragraph with another topic sentence and more evidence. Good writing, in other words, is really important, isn't it? So they're the criteria. I think they're worth 8 marks each, 40 marks for the whole stack. So you might ask, how will I structure this? How will I structure this essay? It's a good question. I'm going to give you some suggestions, some different ways of you might do it. Remembering it's a passage analysis, so you need to use the passages. You can't just write a standard old essay. You've got to use the passages as the basis. So for a passage analysis, of course, I would kind of tend to think of it as a passage analysis with a big plus around views and values. So it's passage analysis plus. You could add a context paragraph, although we did have a lot of little uneasiness, didn't we? And a lot of you struggled with the paragraph B intro in the last SAC, and so not necessarily have to do it that way. But you could put a context paragraph in. You do definitely need to talk about the way that Rich and Walker critique society. So it's not just throwing a couple of views and values points like you might usually do. It's really making views and values the focus of this passage analysis. And as well as somehow keeping the language features alive in all that. It's challenging. I think it's a clearer task than the last one, but it's not simply a passage analysis task in the old days as in the old exam. It's a passage analysis plus. So one structure might be this. It's a pretty basic one. I like it a lot. An introduction with a quote and a linking sentence and some assertions about views and values related to the passages, I should say. Followed up by a little mini paragraph on the life and times, the context, the shaping influences and the politics of these times for Rich or Walker. And then you go into poem 1 and talk about the poem and how it works to critique society and what views and values are revealed, bringing in other key poems as you do. Bringing in other key poems as you do that. Quoting, 1, 2, 3, 4 quotes for each of these paragraphs. Do poem 2, do poem 3, and conclude. Pretty straightforward. That's one structure you might think about trying yourself. Another structure is to maybe combine that context paragraph into the introduction itself. So you do a kind of introduction which tries to bring to bear some of those key moments and influences of Walker or Rich as you're going. I think if you do that, to avoid having a one-page introduction which looks awful, you will need to bring in little context moments throughout as you go. So I think you can do sort of like half a context in the first bit in introduction, and then fill in some of those context details as they're appropriate in the poems through paragraph 2 and 3. Again, a conclusion. Not a bad structure. Simpler structure, and it avoids that horrible, awkward context paragraph sitting by itself and sounding like a pre-rehearsed election speech. Or you might try a structure like this, which is a 2-poem structure. So again, you could put this context into this context bit here, could go up here if you wanted to, but notice this one's just doing 2 poems. And why that's come up a couple of times is in this essay you probably want to bring in more evidence from outside poems than you almost would in a normal passage analysis. So can you do 3 in the time? Maybe you'll plan that you'll do 2. And that's fine too. So this structure is the same structure, separately for 2 poems rather than 3. If you're one of those students I've spoken to who sometimes has trouble finishing the piece in the time you've been allocated, 75 minutes, then this might be a really good way to do that. Focus on 2. Another structure looks the same. What's the difference? I can't even tell the difference here. I think this is the same one. That's a two-poem structure. Oh no, it's not. What's different? Let's look back. This one's different because it's no introduction. Yeah, so that's right. So the poem before was looking at the structure before had an introduction. This one straight into poem one, and that's okay. And the context comes, through discussions. For those of you who maybe have trouble with introductions, or you think that they sound wooden, or they sound kind of unconvincing, or you get lots of crosses against your introductions all the time, there's no reason to do one. You might want to start with the poem one, like you would with the passage analysis. As long as you had hit the bullets, hit the targets all the way through, you should be fine. So, how do I prepare? Well, good picture. If you are going diving into the wreck, you might prepare like this person has, with a lot of equipment, fins and snorkels and regulators all labelled in different colours. But you're preparing for an essay on poetry, so I'll give you 3 examples of things you might do. You might want to do all of them, or you might do a couple only. You should know the poems really well. Reread them, read the notes about them and the background material about them online. There's a whole lot of stuff in OneNote notebook you may not even have noticed. There's there's the 2013 students and all the material they've put up. Look at that. Does it echo what we said? Do they say something better than we said? Surely not. Do they say something we've missed? So have a read of that stuff. And then maybe do some summaries. Either a concept map. Some of you like concept mapping, the big picture diagrams. Others of you will prefer a table, a very clear spreadsheet of poem, view, value, quote. Work out what poems you want to use and get them into your essay. Work out what poems you definitely want to use and make sure they're there. This is a concept map. I'm not sure how clearly that'll come up on YouTube, but this is a concept map of some of the poems. And we've got around the outside, we've got the views, and the inside the poems. And you can see that, like you'd expect, this view across here reads that the artist has a responsibility to bear witness to the atrocities of the world and not to be silent. And that goes into several poems. Or this one here, that Rich is critical of the great inequalities of American society: gender, class, race, religion. And if you follow those arrows, this inequality one goes into 21 Love Poems, goes into Fact of a Doorframe, goes into Necessities of Life, and goes into Aunt Jennifer's Tigers. So you're building up a kind of web of interconnections. There's more than one poem per value or view. There's more poems than there are views, I think, probably. So that's one way of reviewing and revising and preparing. Another way, some of you will prefer it to a straight table. What's the viewpoint? What's the detail about it? What poems do we see this in? And what's a great quote from that poem? Simple way to prepare. So again, the one about silence, that poetry and other forms of art are critical ways of engaging in the world and eliminating silences. And I've just expanded that with, Rich argues that women have been silenced in history and that artists have a responsibility to rewrite women and other minorities back into the world somehow. And I think that's seen in lots of poems, but clearly seen in 21 Love Poems and clearly seen in The Fact of a Doorframe. And a great quote for that: "I fear this silence." So really, a good quote. I'm going to build that quote in somewhere. And finally, another way to prepare might be simply to have a whole lot of quotes, which you are able to bring to the essay. A whole lot of views with a whole lot of quotes to support them. And some examples there. This isn't a Russian poem. Can I accomplish justice here? Now, again, poetry. I'll dare inhabit the world. So there's 3 ways, or you might kind of organise and garner your thoughts together as you prepare to write this sack. I hope that's been useful for you. What I've tried to do over the last 15 minutes and 10 seconds is to give you an overview of the criteria and what they mean, and give you some sense of how you might prepare and organise that as you prepare for your essay. Good luck. Don't forget, you can watch this again and again, and if you've missed a point, and certainly email any questions through to me early next week. Enjoy the weekend.